So I want to actually use that as a springboard. It's one of the questions. I've got more questions than we have time, by the way, James. But it's one I'd like to kind of use that as a segue about your book. So just kind of as a tee up to what this is and why we're doing this. We read a lot too, and we've always found like if we actually read the books and then we talk to the authors as we're doing with you right now, the authors add this texture and context that suddenly makes some of those books come to life, particularly in the one genre we focus on, which is sales literature, which I always joke is literature with a lowercase l, because I'm a lover of the classics. So, but it's an important genre because it's almost guild style knowledge that has to be conveyed and shared. Okay, so you have your book, The Perfect Close, and right in the opening volley, one of the things that you say is how much you read. And when I heard that, I heard this echo through so many of the great authors that we've spoken to, and they all take time to let their readers know that. You don't have to do that when you write a book. Let your readers know that you try to gobble up everything within the category, but you do. You take some time and some words to explain why that is. Can I launch in there and just sort of hear you talk a little bit about the significance of reading
Sure.
for the profession of sales?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, honestly, of all the different assets or whatever things you could try, like you go to a seminar, you could go to a workshop, or you could watch YouTube videos and all those things. But pound for pound and dollar for dollar, there is absolutely nothing even remotely as good as a book is. For you think about it, you might have something that basically contains almost an entire person's lifetime of knowledge on a subject condensed down into 200 pages or so. And here you can get that for, I don't know, if it's on Kindle, you could be $7 or something like that, right? It's some ridiculously low amount. You could get that. And here you're getting all that. And they have organized it very nicely so that you can receive it in the best possible way, instead of you piecing it together from, thousands of different sources all over the internet to try to create your complete picture of what the selling world is like, or what any world is like, to be honest with you, not just selling, right? So like personal achievement is one of my favorite topics, period. And there's just so much there, right? And so, I mean, nothing beats books. And so I read about a book. It's 1 to 2 books every single week. And of course, you and I talked before, there are tricks to being able to go through that much and that many books. I'm an audiophile, so for sure, I spend a lot of time listening to the books. So when I say I read a book, odds are really good. What I'm really saying is that I listen to the book. And then if the book's really good, then I listen to it multiple times until all of the information is ingrained into my psyche, right? And it is better for some types of books than other types of books, right? So books that are super high, like you wouldn't want to read a physics book that way, but Think and Grow Rich, absolutely a wonderful book to read, right, or listen to on audio. So, but the other thing I would say about it is when people first hear that, if I ever tell somebody, hey, I read 104 books last year, they gasp, right? Because I think statistically, the average person doesn't even read a book after they graduate from high school. So just by deciding that you're going to read anything to improve yourself, you've already set yourself probably in the top 15, 10-15% of society by deciding you're going to continue learning somehow. And then if you're deciding that you're going to do that either once a month or you're going to do that once a week, then you've put yourself into some very rarefied territory, right? And if you do that, there's this compounding effect. What will happen is you'll start to see how the different subjects of these different books start to intersect with each other. And that's where real value is created. For example, I'm, obviously, me from my sales career, but not many people know that I also have an accounts receivable background. So I know finance. And then in addition to that, I also have, I'm a hobbyist or a fan of organic chemistry, right? So I'm a fitness buff. And so I have this strange combination of all these different things. And what you find is that once you find an intersection of these two things, you can start to add a huge amount of value to a place where people their only knowledge is only this one very special, specialized area. I think there was a book years ago. I'm trying to remember what it was called. It started. It's called the Compound Effect or something like that. But that's not that book. That's a Darren Hardy book, which is phenomenal. But anyway, the whole point is that as you start to read and you keep reading, it actually multiplies. Now, I've had guys say the exact opposite to me, right? I ask, like in job interviews, when I'm interviewing a salesperson, I like to say, all right, well, tell me, what was the last book you read, right? Tell me what, and that tells me a little bit, are they reading? And it tells me then what are the books are. And if you're reading as many books as I am, odds are super high I might have read the book already. And then if they try to buffalo me, then I'll know, right? I'll say, well, tell me what you liked about the book, right? What do you like? And what did you get out of that? And so it tells me a little bit about the candidate that I'm talking to. Is this person want to continue to improve themselves even now that they're out of school? And anyway, I could go on at some length about all of this, but where I was going with this is, honestly, when people hear about that and they say, wow, I could never do that, it's just a decision, guys. And it's good, better, best, right? So reading one book after you've graduated from high school is better than reading no books, right? Reading one book a month after you graduated from high school is better than reading, one book ever, right? Or one book a year. And then it can go up there. So what I like about it and what I'd recommend is also spend some time learning how to learn, right? Because that's an enabling skill. So if you learn how to learn faster, then what happens is it compounds even more and more and more, then you start to use all these different hacks that you and I were talking about before the show.
The learning demand, I think, on any salesperson who is in the intended audience of your book, because your book is not directed exactly at folks who are selling socks on High Street. But suppose you sell large ticket pharmaceutical contracts or financial services or things with complexity, consulting services. The reading demand, I think, is quite material too, because it's not like you just need to read and learn your craft from your fellow guild members. You actually have this large onus on you to read and understand about your clients, their world and how they work, and then also to read laterally and to jump discipline to discipline. You say this quite eloquently in the book, in particular getting into psychology and to some degree chemistry, in that there's physiology and chemistry and things that go into being a salesperson. So you got this true liberal art where if you really wanted to excel, you can't just be reading in one narrow column.
Yep, 100%. And that, by the way, that chapter is one of my favorite chapters in the whole book. It's my small contribution, I think, that's kind of new to the selling world. I haven't really seen it addressed in the way that I did there. A little bit of research, but it's 100%. Like I said, when you're able to, here's the main problem with it being a professional salesperson, is that trust for us as a career, there's only one career or profession that is lower than us on the trust factor. There's only one. It's politicians. That's it. Even lawyers are higher than us, right, on the food chain. And so anytime you walk into a situation with a customer, you are immediately suspect, right? They assume that you are not a trustworthy person and that anything that you're doing is completely self-serving. And they're hoping to be able to still navigate around that somehow in order to solve the problem that they have, guys. And so one of the things that you can do is, first of all, get off your solution, right? And that's a selling technique, but you just basically stop and just go into the situation thinking about how can I help this person? Okay. Now, there's a couple of things that happen when you first meet a person. They assess you, and right, and this all happens in seconds. At first, they check what they think. What is your intent? Is this person trying to help me or trying to hurt me? Okay, and then after they've judged what they think is your intent, then they say, is this person capable of executing their intent? Okay, and so the social scientists call this warmth and competence. Right, these are the two things. And warmth is judging your intentions, right? And then competence is how good are you at it? All right, so now let me add this one more layer to that's not in the book. And that is that when you first meet with the customer, it's absolutely everything that's in the book is 100% true about conveying all the things that convey your intent. And the mistake, by the way, that salespeople tend to make is they think if they win the competence game, they'll win the sale. right? If I just prove that I'm the best, then you'll buy from me. And that is absolutely not what the data says. Data says exactly the opposite, is that judgments around warmth are primary, meaning they happen first, and they carry more weight. They're stronger than competence, okay? So you're playing to the wrong thing if you're trying to just say, I'm the best, right? Okay. Now there are scenarios where a person will buy the best solution, even if that person is a gorilla or a horrible person, right? If that's the only option that they have. For the most part, they're resisting their own nature to do that. And you don't want that working for you, right? All right. Anyway, so now let's talk about adding this second layer on top of it, which is now when you've demonstrated that your intentions are in the right place, okay, then the next thing they're going to do is they're going to judge that competence. And the way that you do that is you speak to the domain that they're in. They would all love to speak to a specialist that specializes in solving exactly the problem that they are trying to solve right now. That's what they're hoping that you are. And so when you ask the right questions that illustrate that you understand that domain and that you know what levers to pull to produce the different results, your credibility goes up massively, and that's how they're judging your competence, right? So that's why reading in all these different areas and making yourself better as you go, it adds to both factors, right? And when you have both, there's a little matrix. It's not in the book, but if a person has no warmth and no competence, the feeling that it engenders in another person is pity. They just think it's a pathetic person, right? When you have both warmth and competence, then the word that describes that is admiration. They really admire that type of person, right? If you have high competence but low warmth, then that person is considered sort of arrogant, is the word that describes that the best, right? So anyway, where we're going with all this, and this is a long answer to a very short question that you asked me, is that when you study multiple disciplines and then you combine them together when you're selling, what will happen is you'll demonstrate your warmth, because you're always going into the situation not worried about what you're going to get out of it, but what you can do to help the other person accomplish their goal. And what the data shows, if this is new news to anybody, is that when you do that, you actually will sell more. Okay. And there's references in the book that actually show that. We can talk about that if you want. But then the second thing is you've demonstrated your competence in that area, and then boom, now you're in that admiration category, right? That box. And now they're going to be listening to you. And what will happen is trust will go through the roof. I have literally had clients with deals that are $1 million deals that start to take shortcuts, right? Instead of doing their due diligence and exploring an area and another area, what happens is they just decide, you know what? I think this is it. This is the real deal. This is the person I want. And so they won't bother to do the due diligence they should be doing. And guys, that is rare trust indeed. And you have to honor that, right? With great caution. You never take advantage of a person who didn't do their homework because they trust you so much. But if there's a shortcut in selling, I just shared it with you, right? Is make sure that you're engendering that warmth of the competence, right? Which increases trust. And Stephen Covey says, as trust goes up, the speed of the sale goes down, right? So there's an inverse proportion. On the flip side of that, if they don't trust you at all, you're going to end up with the opposite, right? They're going to want all kinds of legal terms and things like that, because they just don't, there's something about the whole arrangement or you or the company that they're not trusting. And so the process gets longer and longer and longer because they're trying to hedge all their bets from the things they don't trust.
I'd really like you to double click. You just referenced it there and it's in the book. Double click this idea of, if the client allows you a shortcut, they take a shortcut, it's a mistake to simply just allow that and then assume that that's the paradigm of the relationship thereafter. Can you just say a couple of more words about that? Because that, I think, might feel counterintuitive to a lot of folks. And to me, that was one of those little nuggets that could be sort of an article or maybe a book in itself, but it passes by quickly. Can you say more on that, James?
Sure. Let me start with an end game for you, right? So I just shared one great accelerator, right? Shortcut in sales. I'm going to share another one right now. And that is, seriously, if there's a shortcut in sales, it's do a great job for clients and have that client help you get other clients. Okay. Now that sounds super obvious. And we all know referrals is it's all about that. And so how do you get to the point If, by the way, if you do what I'm suggesting here, you'll get to the point as a sales professional that you won't even have time to field all the inbound leads that you're getting. You'll spend all of your time just following up on the clients that are sending you business because you're doing such a good job for the clients. Now, how do you make that happen? Well, when they get to the point that they trust you, and what's happening is their inner sense, they're super smart, and there's a bunch of science behind this. Kevin, if you want me to share it, I will. But they can tell that you're being authentic, right? That you're more interested in helping them solve their problem than trying to get some money from them. And once they determine that, and then they determine that, wow, this guy's got enough competence to be able to solve this problem. These guys can really produce the result that I'm looking for. What happens is their brain starts to relax and they go, all right, well, I think that's it then. All we need to do is give them some money and these guys will take care of us. And so what I'm going with this is you can never betray that. And if you did do that, then everything I said to frame that all up, which is to have a client give you another client, you would be losing all of that. And that the value of having one customer refer another customer to you is worth, I don't know how much time you think you might have sold, but if a customer is taking a shortcut and you think they shouldn't, you need to bring it up. Right? You need to say, hey, I noticed that we didn't talk about this. I noticed we didn't talk about that. Right? And so some people would tell you to stop talking. Right? As soon as a customer says, yeah, stop talking. And what I would say is for simple sales, that's probably true. Right? I mean, if they don't need to know more, then don't share anymore. But if you're dealing with large, complex systems that have many points of failure, many issues with adoption, things like that, which is the world that I come from, guys, those issues are eventually going to come up. So you may as well deal with it now to set expectations and plan around it so that you can make sure that the result that you are promising is going to happen for the customer. And what will happen, instead of slowing your sale down, you will dot your I's and you'll cross your T's, but your trust will go from, let's just say it was 10 out of 10, and then you slow down and you even did that, it'll go to 100 out of 10. I'm just telling you that their desire, they're saying, I have found a rare person on this earth that cares more about what I'm trying to get done here than taking a shortcut. And sometimes, by the way, they still take shortcuts. But when they see that your intent is to do that, right? When they become convinced that you're willing to give them the result that you're promising, regardless, then you're in rarefied territory. And what will happen is customers will invite you to the board meetings. They'll invite you to all kinds of stuff. And to appeal to your growth desires here, right, from a monetary perspective, is they'll start referring other people to you because there's just not that many people like that out there. Most salespeople would probably take the money and run, right, rather than to take time. And so anyway, I don't know if I've beat that to death, but the point is and that I make briefly in the book is just that, when you've gotten to the point where a customer is just willing, I mean, when you've already delivered for them, then there's a whole nother meeting where you come back later and they go, this guy's already proved himself. We just trust 100% of what this person says because they know they'll never betray me, right? I'm telling you, that is wonderful trust. It will speed things up because you won't have any competition, but at the same time, you got to always honor it, right? Don't ever half deceive them or anything like that. You just got to be 100% above board. And let me just tell you what it's like from a satisfaction perspective. Man, selling is so much nicer when someone introduces you and says, this guy solved these problems for us. I love this guy, right? And they give you an endorsement like that. And then you go in there, there's no competition. There's no competition. It's just you and you win. And so all of that is a whole lot easier, a whole lot more satisfying and fun than trying to think, oh, what can I say that would persuade this person, right? And people get into that mode because they think selling is about persuasion, but it's not. Selling is really more about facilitating decisions on behalf of the customer, correct decisions, I would say. And sometimes that includes you, but sometimes it doesn't. And as long as the customer understands that that's exactly what you're trying to achieve for them, they will trust you and they'll give you all the information you need to solve their problem. It's when they sense that they don't trust you, right? And then they start withholding information, right? And then now the whole selling process becomes dysfunctional because how the heck am I supposed to make a prescription if I can't make a diagnosis? And how am I supposed to make a diagnosis if you're not telling me any of your symptoms, right? So it's exactly the reason why high trust actually accelerates the sale.
We built a course a year and a half ago called Having Difficult Conversations for one of our clients. because their folks were getting into some predictably difficult conversations around things, James, like penalty fees for late payment and some things like that. We had to go back to root causes and take a look at what you're talking about. There's this glow moment when a contract is being signed or a deal is being closed and so forth. And it's like, oh, I'm not going to ruin the glow by having some of the, slightly I dotting and T crossing conversation right now. It looks like it's not going to be an issue. And so that tiny little dragon is born and left to sit in its cave being fed, knights and maidens for a while. And then lo and behold, like a year and a half later, when you have to introduce something like that late payment fee or something, it's like, well, where was this in the conversation? This is brand new to me. And it's the vicious cycle rather than a virtuous cycle straight away, because that little opportunity early on was missed. We never were able at that time, James, we hadn't read your book. We weren't able to sort of articulate it quite as eloquently as you did. But I just thought that was such a powerful idea that if it were universal across sales in all sectors, in all geographies, the craft would become more enjoyable. Customers would enjoy it. That you just can't think of a situation where you wouldn't want that happening, or a situation where if it started to happen, it wouldn't improve things. So I just thought it was one of the great gems of your book.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. I think what you're getting to there is that people don't like surprises, especially undesirable surprises. So if we just take the time to get clear and make sure we're all on the same page before a surprise happens, then of course, when something happens, if we explain to them, hey, there's a late fee, the reason that we do that is for this and for this and for this, it helps us serve you better when we do this, right? Whatever the reasons are, if you explain it correctly, they'll understand why they exist, right? It's hard for us to run a business when we don't get a steady revenue stream, right? You can understand that. I'm sure they like to get a steady revenue stream. And there are other reasons. But when they understand it and they get it, they go, okay, yes, you're right, right? Then if there's a late fee, then they're like, okay, yeah, fair on you, right? I made a mistake, I owe the fee, instead of getting all upset about it.
Can I take a hard left turn in the road here and just go a totally different direction?
Well, so far it hasn't done anything I expected so far. So that's
well, James, honestly, if you would like us to say, tell us about your book, what's in the book, then we could do that. But I think we'll probably have more fun going this way. Advances. I think that's an idea that when people read this book, they're not going to be necessarily prepared for, and it's one of the great insights. Can you say what an advance is?
Sure, and I'd love to take credit for that, but I did not. I didn't invent the concept. There's a famous author named Neil Rackham. I'm sure you know who he is, Kevin, but for those who don't, Neil Rackham performed the largest set of face-to-face selling studies that were ever conducted, in over 35,000 face-to-face sales interactions. And this all happened in the 80s, by the way. And we learned a ton about selling from the research that he did. And he had to come up with a bunch of terms, brand new terms that didn't exist in selling until Neil Rackham came around. And one of those terms is what you just mentioned. It's called an advance. And the reason that he had to come up with this new term, an advance, is because what Neil Rackham learned is that 9 out of 10 sales interactions don't end with a win or a lose. That's not what happens. What happens in 9 out of 10 sales interactions is we either get an advance where the sale moves forward in a little way. Okay, that's the simple definition of an advance, is the sale moving forward in a little way. Or what he called a continuation, which is a whole nother term that he invented. And a continuation is a situation where the sale isn't lost, but it didn't progress either. It's just sitting there, right? So if you had a whole bunch of deals in your pipeline and your pipeline's all bloated, but nothing's getting closed, then what you have is you have a lot of meetings with continuations, right? There's nothing ever moving forward. So the idea of an advance is super important for a couple of different reasons, okay? First of all, in the perfect close, we teach 2 questions that are 95% effective at getting the sale to move forward. And when we say 95% effective, what we mean is it's either going to close your deal or it's going to move the sale forward in a small way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's either going to be a close or an advance when you use it every single time. And it's not going to be confrontational with the customer. So you'll like that part. I'm happy to share that with your audience, Kevin, if you want. The other thing that it does, though, in my assessment, which is as important, maybe even more important, is when we ask for an advance, a small commitment, it's a test, right? To see if the customer is really interested enough to do something. All right. So, and I'll give you some examples of small ones, like an introduction to another party, right? Another stakeholder somewhere in the opportunity. Well, that's a little hurdle, right? That's an ask. It's not closing the deal, but it is an ask, and they're putting their own reputation on the line a little bit when they do an introduction, right? So that's a simple one. In the healthcare space that we did when I was doing rev cycle, we would ask for their entire financials, for a whole organization's financials, and I got to tell you, people would resist that. Okay. They would resist that. Right. And the reason that they would resist it, right, is because that's sensitive information. They're worried someone's going to, and it's their dirty laundry. But the reason that they were inviting us is because they're thinking that something might be wrong with it. Right. And they could possibly outsource the whole thing at a lower cost than having their own team do it. Right. And these are big decisions. And so I had to have it. And it'd be a little bit like me saying, hey, Kevin, I'll pay you to mow my lawn. You want to mow my lawn? What would the next question be out of your mouth?
Yeah. How much?
How big? Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'll pay $100 to mow my lawn.
Oh yeah. And then the next question is, what kind of square footage are we talking
there?
about?
Yeah. Boom. You nailed it right there. Right. It's like, well, so how big's your yard? How big's your yard? Right. And that is the question. People would say, well, what is your rate? They basically ask it from a rev cycle perspective, kind of like, what's your price? And since you don't know how big their yard is, it's actually impossible to answer the question, right? And so a big advance is, will you give me all your financial and claim data so I can analyze what's going on? And we knew we had a person that was very, very interested in solving problems. If they would give that to us, if they wouldn't, then first of all, it wasn't that we were being jerks about working with them. It's just that I can't even quote it if I don't know how big your yard is, right? And so these are both little, and every single sale has slightly different advances in it, right? So one of the exercises that are in the book is for you to figure out all the little steps that finally get you to the big step, right? So this concept of an advance is important because it's a lot of little steps. And there is some psychology. When you take one step, you're much more likely to take a second step along those same lines, right? And so that is an important. And then the closer you get to the end, the more you accelerate your efforts. So these two things actually are why advances work. And that's what I was saying before is, while Neil Rackham never mentioned why advances work, I went to the effort to show you the science behind that. So back to your question about advances, it's in my opinion, if we ask them for a simple advance, right, something simple like an introduction or something like that, and they're not willing to take that step, that should tell us something about how we're investing our time with this customer. And like I said, what will happen, and in case your listeners want to know, you're going to ask them, does it make sense for us to X? And your X is going to be the advance, okay? And then they're going to say yes, they're going to say no to that. If they say yes, great, you're in business, right? If they say no to that, then the kindergarten version is to just throw the ball back to them and say, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step? Okay. And what will happen in 90% of cases is that they will suggest a very logical next step for where they're at in their buying process. And so you can see it's not confrontational at all. We're just asking them, does it make sense for us to? And then you're going to come up with what we call an ideal advance. It's the best possible outcome. And then you want to come up with a couple of alternatives just in case for some reason your ideal advance turns out to be unrealistic for some reason. And you will fall back to those if for some reason your ideal advance turns out unrealistic, or an even better scenario, if they say yes to the first one, you can actually suggest the other ones in addition to that, and you can speed your sale up.
Does it make sense for us to X? I think there's a big promise when you get into the book, and there's a big promise on the cover with the title. But you deliver, because that's such a digestible, a technique. It's such an easy phrase, I think, for people to feel those words in their mouth. As opposed to anything that you call sort of the rogues gallery, or like the wall of shame of tricks and techniques and like arm twists and things. So that I think is something that I sort of want people to understand as they're considering whether to dig deeper into your book. The big claims that often come in sales literature are tough to prove out. And in this case, the big claim actually has a very subtle and a very humble delivery, which is that easy sentence: does it make sense for us to X?
Yeah, actually, something that didn't exist at the time the book was written, but did come out afterwards, is there is a company out there called Gong.io, Gong.io. And what these guys do, outbound call analytics, right? For outbound call centers. And so they have data, they have a database of millions and millions of calls. And so they analyzed over 1 million sales calls looking for the answer to this question: what's the best closing approach that there is? And after analyzing over 1 million sales calls, they determined that the perfect close, which is basically what we just shared with your audience, is hands down the best closing approach that there is, and that top performers use it on average about 3 times per hour, right? So, but if you were just to go to YouTube and Google, and search for, closing techniques, you're going to get some of the most dysfunctional techniques that have continued to go on and on and on for decades, despite the fact that they've been proven to all be dysfunctional. And in most cases, it actually will backfire on you. But there is now science that didn't exist at the time I wrote the book that proves that the perfect close is the best approach that you can have for advancing the sale anyway.
It passes a test that I've been working on, James. You've heard of the golden rule and maybe also the silver rule.
I know the platinum rule.
I don't know the platinum rule. What's
all right,
the platinum rule?
You share the silver rule and I'll share the platinum rule.
Okay, the golden rule is typified by its expression by Jesus Christ, which is you should do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the silver rule is characterized by the Jewish tradition, Maimonides, and a couple of other folks, the Code of Hammurabi elsewhere, which is you should not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. So one is a commission. There's a certain thing that you have to proactively get up and do each day, which is the positive thing that you wish people would do for you, which is a tougher bar. And then the other one is you just better leave people the hell alone and don't do the things that you don't want done to you. So it's a bit more of sort of a libertarian take on things.
I love them both. That's a great enhancement. Well, Tony, I didn't invent the platinum rule. Tony Alessandro is the author that came up with the platinum rule, and his is do unto others as others would have them done unto them. Right. So in other words, you do what they want. They do what they want you to do. Right. Yes. And so instead of thinking, all right, maybe I want to be beat down a little bit, so it's okay for me to beat down somebody else. Well, that's not the standard. The standard is, well, how does that guy want to be? And honestly, it's very, very close to the silver rule, right? It's just the positive frame of the silver rule. So anyway, that's funny that we.
So the rule that I've been ironing out, because we at Sage, what we do is we organize academies for the organizations that we serve. So we come along and we help them organize how are people going to teach and learn and continue to make this a learning environment. And that's our raison d'etre. But when it comes to something like sales training, the test in my mind is, would the clients of this organization be delighted or content even that with the training that we're giving them? If they sat in, would they be horrified by what we're trying to teach these folks to do to their clients? And I love that test. It continues to pass muster on some of the great training frameworks of history, like Trusted Advisor, or like, by the way, the Perfect Close. So if you had, if you go and work for one of your healthcare alma maters or similar organization, and their clients came in and saw the dirty trick that you're teaching them, the perfect close, they would be like, I'm delighted with this. This is no dirty trick. This is perfect, right?
I wish every salesperson was like that, right?
You want these guys to ask me whether it makes sense to do the next thing so that I get the chance to say, no, that isn't what I want to do next. What I want to do next is take some time to read what you sent me. No, what I want to do next is introduce you to Keith. That's the next thing. So it passes that test. And I would argue that you could look across some of the great frameworks, tools, techniques, and when they pass that test, they have lasting value. And the ones that don't, might bounce around for 5-10 years and then they're gone.
Yeah, they disappear. Yeah, you made my day with that little comment there. Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't bring you on just to shine you entirely, James. But when we see stuff that's good, we want it to be known, and I think there's some real integrity in that.
So, one of the things I wondered, the Perfect Close is translated into Spanish now, and so we're working on a couple of others. But I often wondered, does it work in other languages, or is there enough nuance in the "does it make sense" phrase in English that it only works in English? And so what I've learned is, at least in Spanish and in Indian, that's not the language.
Hindi.
Help me. Hindi. Thank you. It does work. And so far I haven't found a language that it doesn't work in, right? That doesn't make sense, still leaves it open enough that it's not confrontational. It's still conveying intent. You're still giving them control and permission, right? And all that. So far it seems to work in all the languages, but I have my doubts, right? I wonder if there's another language where if you ask that question that it would come off wrong, but and you never know when you're translating a book unless you happen to be an expert in both languages. Because I don't speak Spanish. I have no idea how well they translate it. So I have to ask other people who do if it really works.
I think if you really want the counter example, I'd go to Japan first. I expect, because there's natural like hierarchy and deference.
Yeah.
So saying something like, does it make sense? Could be a little cheeky or flippant there.
Maybe.
But there'll still be a translation. And one of the I hadn't heard or used myself your particular phrasing, does it make sense? But the basic frame was already there in my past life and career, which was speaking with the heads of private equity firms, who are also sort of demanding and serious, sober people. But we used effectively the same kind of sentence.
Interesting. Do you speak Japanese?
I used to. I've lost it. I've lost it, James.
I was going to say, oh, Genki desu ka? Yeah, I have some friends that,
Hi, Genki
desu. that have, but I never did ask this question because this was long before I wrote the book. So before I even learned it myself.
There's one more particular beautiful Easter egg I wanted to get to, and I'm going to save that for last, which is your final thought. I was actually thinking, like, how do I talk to James about the many things that are in here? And the final thought is almost the first thought. But I want to make sure that we touch on that chapter. Maybe just before then, can you say a little bit about the genesis of this book? So you spent this career on the front line and then managing frontliners, but a lot of it specifically in one sector, which is known for being demanding and as a salesperson or as for sales divisions of organizations, which is healthcare or pharmaceuticals, the broad healthcare industry. Can you just kind of take people into where this came from?
Sure. Let me see if I can do it in a fast way. So I personally came from the domain expert side of the business, right? So I used to be the person that the salesperson would take out with them to answer the difficult questions around finance and accounts receivable and things like that, right? And so I remember going out there and being with those salespeople thinking, man, I hope I never have to do that, right? I just remember looking at it and thinking, oh man, gosh, I could never do that. And then there's a long story, but I'll just tell you, through just a strange set of circumstances, I ended up getting thrust into being a direct salesperson. And I was doing very, very poorly at this. And it was a super humbling experience for me. I remember working with all these different clients. I had, I'm trying to decide how to do this in a very short way, because it's the way I discovered it is not completely in the book. It's a very shortened version of it. But I remember figuring out at some point. I started analyzing myself and my selling the same way I would analyze finances. And I would say, all right, well, what's wrong? And clearly, and I had a ton of deals in my pipeline, right? So I could get meetings, but I couldn't ever get anybody over the finish line. So I said, obviously I have a closing problem, right? So I started reading every possible book I could find on closing, right? And so I learned all of these different things. And back then I was stupid. So I thought, I'll try these, and I would try each one of these. And I got to tell you, I could go on for an hour on these crazy different closes that are out there. There's one out there called a sharp angle close, right? And the way that this one works is the customer in the middle of the process that might say, well, hey, can you guys do this? Is this a thing that you could do? And literally the advice on this close is just rather than answer the question, you're supposed to say, well, would you buy it if it could? Right? So think about how horrid this question is, right? So you have a person asking an honest question about whether you can do something and solve a particular problem for them. And instead of just answering their question, you try to trap them, right? I tried that a bunch of times. It did not work for me even one time. But what I did do, and I saw millions of times, every time I tried it, I could see the visual erosion of goodwill on their faces. They're like, oh my gosh, is this the kind of guy that we have here? Man, totally backfired on me, right?
You spent the whole credibility wallet, the whole thing.
Boom, gone, all gone. And most of these closes are like that, right? And there's data to prove it. You don't even have to take my word for it. But I'll tell you one that was crazy. I had a really big client. They were already using our software. And so we were trying to get them to use our services. Okay. And so I'm having dinner with their COO and their CEO. And then I had just read about the assumptive close, right? And it has a close cousin called the alternate choice close, right? And if you didn't know how this works, is you basically ask the customer, do you want A or B? And it doesn't matter which one they choose, they've chosen you, right? And so you're basically shoehorning them into a solution. And so I remember getting all excited about reading this close and going to this meeting. I was all prepared. We had this great conversation about everything that we do. And then when it comes time, I just ask them and say, well, do you want service package A? Do you want service package B? And oh my gosh, when the CEO heard this, he pushes back from the table. It was like he's thunderstruck. Like I'd made his meal bad or something, right? And he pushed back from the table and he goes, do you think that just because we use your software that you're going to win this business, right? He says, we have a lot riding on this. And so I'm going to bring in at least 3 other vendors to do this. And the way he said 3, it was like he was spitting at me, right? And so he said, and then this is what came out next, right? That has stuck with me forever. He goes, don't assume that just because we're using your software, we're picking your service. Boom, ouch, right? Mm-hmm. And you know what? The guy didn't pick us. Right? Even though we were easily the best option. No one knows our software better than us, right? Do you think some other vendor is going to come in there and do that? No, of course not, right? But he was so mad that I assumed that the business was ours, that he deliberately picked somebody else. Okay, and that cost us a lot. It was a very big deal and an obvious win that we should have gotten, right? At a really hard time in my life, I learned that lesson. So anyway, I could go on forever about trying all these because at the time, I was just so dumb. I didn't know any of these things, right? And so I was just reading like crazy. And I'm sad to report this to most people, but about 99% of all the closing techniques being taught out there are dysfunctional, and they will actually backfire on you. They will actually do the opposite of what, like alternate choice absolutely can work if you're trying to sell either a large or a medium drink. Okay, when the value of a deal is small, but when it's hundreds of $1,000s or millions of dollars, you cannot use it. It will backfire on you. So don't take a standard that works on a very small size deal and try to apply it to a really big deal, because the process is much, much more complex. All right, so the short version is I found a clinic. This clinic was having serious financial trouble, and so, but they had turnover. They'd lost all their employees. Okay. And so here I'm trying to do a good discovery to figure out what the problem is, right? So I can diagnose it. And I couldn't figure it out because nobody knew. Nobody knew at this organization. So I'm like, all right, well, how am I supposed to give a good prognosis if I can't even diagnose what the problem is, right? So I'm like, we're stuck. And then finally just out of frustration, I blurted out, they goes, well, does it make sense for me to look through your for your accounts receivable and see what's actually happening, right? So basically, I was offering to do an entire audit for these guys, and they said yes. They said yes, right? And so, I did ultimately, by the way, figure out what they did wrong. And I explained that our system would not do that, right? And they eventually became a client, okay? And I was super excited. I went back to our office at a very hard time. And this was the one watershed moment that changed, right, for me. But it was later that I'm thinking about it. So why did these guys move forward when everybody else didn't move forward? Why? Yeah, what was different about this one? And I thought, well, maybe it was assessment. No, because I've offered assessments lots of times in times past, right? But I didn't do it that way. Maybe it was this client was super urgent, right? They're hemorrhaging money. So that was it. No, I'd worked with lots of clients that were hemorrhaging money. So it wasn't that, right? And so it had to be literally just how I asked, right? And then I immediately thought, but was it really? I mean, I didn't even really close, right? And so I had tried to use all these other closes in the other books, and that all didn't work. And then I realized it was just that phrase doesn't make sense, right? And of course, immediately, it's too simple. Like in the book, it'll say, hey, if you want to jump right to chapter 12, you can have it in an hour. You can have the answer in an hour, right?
That's right.
And so, guys, it's so easy that it seems like it's too good to be true, right? And so I immediately, even when it happened to myself, I immediately second guessed myself. I said, no way, can't be that. It's too easy.
One off.
Right? And but I also thought this, I got nothing to lose. So I just started trying it on everything, and it made a massive difference for me, right? And so one by one, all of these opportunities that were stuck in my pipeline just started moving forward. Now, they weren't all necessarily moving forward at the rate I wanted them to move forward, but they were all moving forward at the pace that they wanted to be moving forward. And ultimately, my close ratio ended up being around 80% of these deals. We're closing all of these deals, all because I just moved the sale forward at the rate that, at these small advances, right? I was just moving each one of these forward at the rate that they wanted to go. And that made a massive mess. But that's how I discovered it. That's how I just blurted it out. And then later I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? I got to repeat that. And it just seems so easy, right? But anyway, that's how I ended up discovering it. And then since then, I've gone in to fill every role that you can in sales, from EVP, individual contributor. I already told you I was a domain expert and VP for a region, all these different roles. Yeah. And what I learned is, while we're teaching domain experts, they very often say that this is the part that they hate the most. They don't like trying to get the customer to take on any kind of a commitment. And so it was at me remembering my own challenges as a domain expert that made, man, I gotta do something to teach this, so that other people don't have to be frustrated the same way I do, or even worse, make all the stupid mistakes I did, right? But anyway, that's the short version. That's how I ended up creating it, and how I ended up writing the book, is to help those people that were uncomfortable with the whole sales process, or I should say the closing process.
That is awesome. You stumbled, you were out in the field and just doing what you got to do, is be in the field, stumbled over a stone, and it turned out to be the, corner of a Roman ruin.
Oh yeah. And I can't even tell you how bad it sucked, right? Because for months I was doing it so badly. And I had moved from my house to a different city to run this office as an operations person. And then they told me, oh, you have to be in sales. So instead of running this clinic like I thought I dreamed I was going to be, I ended up getting thrust in sales because they said, we really need you in sales. And then they hired another person to take the very job that I left briefly to be in sales. And I'm like, this is the worst. So literally, I was crushed. I had just bought a new car. Yeah. So, anyway, I was, because a bunch of my money was supposed to be coming from commissions, which wasn't happening, right? So I was just like, I was at rock bottom when I discovered all this. So just being able to go from zero to and working 60 hours a week trying to figure out how am I going to survive, to, oh, hey, look, everything is working now. I mean, when that deal happened, I went back and told the whole office, and everybody cheered, because it was like we were really struggling. The company was at that point.
That's so cool. I'm glad we talked about it, because I did it's a beautiful story. I think a number of people have some version of that where they have an aha moment. I mean, not everybody gets the chance to sort of turn it into an entire thesis and share it with the world, but I love that story. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. When I was at the rock bottom there, I remember calling my dad, who's also in sales for years, and I said, "Man, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I don't think this is for me." Right? And it was just because so many people in that particular week had all said rude stuff to me. And he said a really important thing to me, at least at that time, that I learned. He goes, don't try to get your emotional needs met in sales, right? You can get your financial needs met, but don't try to get your emotional needs met in sales. You can get that from me and your mom or your friends. But if you try to get your emotional needs met in sales, you're going to be on this roller coaster all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of go into the sale, just tabula rasa, blank slate. Can you help this person? Maybe you can, maybe you can't, right? And so you're not leaning into it. And what that does is it makes the whole experience of selling so much more enjoyable, because you don't have to, what I would say is, quota or a need. Let's just say you've got yourself up to your eyebrows in debt. You really need this sale. Well, guys, it is very hard to go objective into a sales meeting when you're thinking about those kinds of things. You'll be transmitting all the wrong, silent messages to the customer. But we need the opposite. And you're like, you don't care about the outcome. You're just going to try and help as best you can. Man, it is so much funner to sell. And as it turns out, it's way more effective. And so it just makes the whole enjoyable part of selling so much better, right? So instead of sales being a grind, you really feel like you're just helping people. And then afterwards, they're so grateful that you helped them that they refer other people. And you get into this virtuous cycle where your customers will feed you other customers.
Your final thought in the book talks about caring as one key ingredient to what you're referencing. Like really caring. Do you care about your customers? You talk about this guy you met on the plane who is killing it, but sort of struggling with all of the downstream, failure of him nailing all of his deals that he was high-fiving himself for. Talk to me about caring. Actually, talk to everybody about caring. This, to me, is one of the thorny, intractable puzzles of sales, which is when people figure out how to care about their clients, it exudes out of their pores. You don't need to choose your words or make the right eye contact or shake with the right firmness in your hand. It just comes out, and the human instinct, the human ability to detect it is very high. You can smell it, you can see it, you can just tell if somebody cares. And you saved that for the final thought in the book. So I know that it's important. In fact, you decided to title a chapter Final Thought. So can you just kind of share, a number of the people, James, who listen to us are not actually salespeople. They're just people who must sell. So think partners at law firms and accounting firms, or people who are fairly senior in consulting organizations, and so on. Other folks do have official sales titles, but for all of them, I think this message can be a bit of a tricky one to understand, because you feel like, oh, I've already taxonomized myself. I'm the kind of guy who cares. I'm the kind of gal who doesn't care, and what have you. But there's a different message in your final thought. Can you maybe just share it here, caring about clients?
Sure. Well, the science we talked about earlier about intention, right, is super relevant to this question. And the thing that we didn't say in there is that there's a little axiom that I add to that chapter, which is that intent matters more than technique does. Okay. Intention matters more than technique. And that's because the warmth or the intent is weighted heavier than competence is. And so that's the point I'm trying to make at the end, where we're talking about, I called him Ace, but this guy, he's a killer. He's a killer sales guy. And the problem that he was having, so I ended up sitting next to this guy, for those who don't know, on an airplane. It was a 4-hour flight. And this guy, honestly, he was very intimidating looking. He really was. But just to the nines, he was fabulous, right? I mean, really impressive. So competence off the charts. And so we started talking about what we do on the way. And then I have this conversation with him and said, well, why, what are you doing? How's it working out? And he kind of confesses to me, goes, well, the problem is my company can't implement the solutions that I'm selling. And I'm like, well, why is that? And he goes, well, the customers are always are unhappy. Right. And then he also later confessed that his customers were asking for long legal agreements and all this kind of stuff, right? And so I'm cutting this story a little short here, but I asked him, well, is there any chance that the customer thinks that you don't really care about whether or not they get the result that you're promising? And he kind of took a step back there for a minute, right? And so he was quiet for a second, and he goes, well, James, it really is not my responsibility for them. It's my responsibility to make sure they have the tools to succeed, but it's not my job to make sure they get the result. That's on them, right? That's on them. And I said, do you think there's any chance that they can tell? And man, he did not take that well. So like he was like quiet for about an hour actually, right? And so we did our own thing for a while, and then afterwards, he goes to me as we're landing, right? He goes, James, I do think it's their responsibility, but I do think it is possible that the way I'm selling these guys is the thing that's causing all of my problems with legal and all of my problems with my own team, where they can't deliver on the expectations that I set for the customer. Right. And so we had a very brief moment to do a little coaching while we're grabbing our bags and everything and heading off the airplane. And I said, well, I think you'll find that if you think about it for a minute, that you really do care, And if you communicate to the customer, it'll make a difference for you. And so later we stayed in touch. That guy changed that moment changed the way he sold in a very big way. And he ultimately went on to be their number one sales guy, and then went on to another Fortune 500 company and became their top salesperson at this other company, right? And all of it was basically, he had the competence, but he wasn't willing to commit to deliver the customer's result. And that was affecting their trust in him. And so, yeah, your question, right? It's all really back to intent. And here's the beautiful thing that it ties this all together, to me anyway, right? What I think is sublime is we spent a little time in one of the chapters talking about the science behind this. And when you explain to people that there's something called mirror neurons, where you can detect what a person is thinking and feeling without any, it's like some kind of telepathy that happens between people. There's something called micro expressions, where they're like literally 1/25th or 1/15th of a second expressions. You can't see them, right? Unless you slow down film, you can't actually see these expressions, right? And so people tend to describe them more like a feeling when they're talking to somebody. And then there's something called paralanguage, which is the way, it's the tonality or the prosody in your voice, right? And all of these things send a message to the customer, right? And when you tell people about that, immediately the first thing they say is, well, how am I supposed to control all that? And the answer is, you can't. You can't control it. The only way to show that you have good intent or true intent is to have good and true intent. That's it. That's it. Have you actually, and so to me, there is a sublime, wonderful principle in the universe being exhibited there. And if you adopt that, the irony is you'll end up selling more, and you'll be so much more happy and satisfied in your selling efforts. And so I hope that answers your question, Kevin, but it is why I left it to the end, because in my mind, that's the deep meaning of the book, right? The book, you get a great technique, right? You get the 2 questions, you even get, 5 variations of that. So there's some payoff in the book, but to me, intent matters more than technique. And in order to convey good intent, you have to have good intent, is like the deepest meaning that there is in the book.
It's such a good benediction. Thanks for saying it again. And for those who will listen to this after we're finished, you can, at your own peril, maybe skip to chapter 12, and hear what the perfect close is, but do not skip the final thought, because it's a great one. James, our community of listeners and clients and so forth will likely want to look you up one place or another, either your books or your other writings or your work. Can you just give them a bit of direction for where to find you?
Sure. So my name is, for whatever reason, is hard for people to pronounce, I guess, but it's Muir, M-U-I-R. So the website is Pure Muir. So it rhymes. So it's PUREMUIR.com. And a lot of what we talked about is actually free for download. If you just go to puremuir.com/resources, there's a big bundle there. I used to have them all separate. there's too many of them. So I just created one big file. You can download that whole file and you'll get all the models for the perfect close. You'll get some planning sheets. You'll get some, there's some presentations that even cover some of the stuff that we've done here that I've done as keynotes. And the first 3 chapters of the book are there too, including the chapter that has all the science that we talked about during our interview today. So all of that's available there. It's all free just to see if it's right for you. And if it is, then get my guest and get the book. You can just get it off Amazon, right? That's an easy way to get it if you want. But that's probably the easiest, best way. I'm certainly very active on LinkedIn, so you're all certainly welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested. And I have certainly a lot of friends there in the Asia Pacific area. So you'll probably see some that we're connected to some of the same people, I would imagine.
Super.